What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. Unfortunately, we don't have a guest this week, but that's alright because we've got volleyball news. One volleyball player, one of the top prospects in girls volleyball, that is only a junior, has made her commitment. Where is she going, and what school does she attend, and where is she from originally? Find that out. We'll find that out soon. And the SEC is making news as they have announced a new start plan and a new scheduling format for their fall sports, which includes women's volleyball. So we'll be diving on into that pretty shortly. And also, two Big 12 powerhouse teams, Baylor and Texas, have announced their schedules. And the Big 12 has also announced their schedule format as well. What surprises does the Big 12 have in store? And are Baylor and Texas the favorites to win it all this year? All that and more here on Set Point. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports. And welcome everybody to another edition of Set Point. Like I said, my name is Teran Rodriguez. I am your host, and without any further delay, let's get on into some volleyball news. Yes, I had to use that sound effect because this is some big volleyball news, and it comes from the girls/women's volleyball aspect. Long Beach Poly junior outside hitter/setter Adonia Yandal Faumuina, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and has made her commitment. And keep in mind, Adonia Yandal Faumuina is one of the top prospects in the nation. She is the number 2 prospect in the junior class by Prep Dig, a top 13 recruit by Volleyball magazine, and a sophomore All-American in 2019, and she's also the number 7 ranked recruit by Prep Volleyball. And where is Adonia Yandal Faumuina going to? Well, can we get a drum roll, please? Miss Faumuina will be attending the University of Southern California, in other words, USC. Okay, it's not that cool, but that is really huge for USC. She is going to attend USC, and she's only a junior, so she won't be looking that far ahead, but Adonia Yandal Faumuina hails from Long Beach, California, and she attends Long Beach Poly, and she is definitely a player to watch for this year. And Long Beach Poly this year is going to be loaded, so I'm excited to see what she can bring to the table, and I'm really excited to see what she could possibly bring to USC because she's a setter and an outside hitter, so she can play both positions. That's what makes her a unique talent, and I think she's going to do really good for USC when she gets to the Pac-12. But she's not going to look that far ahead. She still has her junior year, and then she still has her senior year the following year. So she has a little bit more time before she could look ahead to college volleyball. But she is definitely going to be going into a program that's kind of on the rebuilding side. USC did have an interesting year last year. They finished 11-9 in the Pac-12, and they finished 18-14 last year. They made it to the second round of the NCAA tournament, where they lost to number 1 seed Baylor. So that's the thing right there. So congratulations to Miss Adonia Yandel Faumuina on committing to USC. That's a huge pickup for them. So, and that's really, I think that's going to be a deadly USC team, because once USC gets its like youngins all together, and USC has one of the more impressive draft recruiting classes in the near future. So that recruiting class it just got even better come 2022. So big ups to USC, and congratulations once again to Adonia. Well deserved on her part. So let me give a quick shout to the chat room real quick. Shout to Larry B, says game time, and Davidson Crook says what's good. Davidson, I hope you're tuning in, because this next portion of the show is kind of dedicated to you, but it's actually some big-time news. The SEC has set its new start dates for its fall sports. This was announced on August 27, 2020 in Birmingham, Alabama, that the SEC has established a new start date and format for the SEC fall sports, which includes women's volleyball and all the other 14 teams in the SEC. So skipping through all the fall sports of the SEC, going down to women's volleyball, the season starts on the weekend of October 18th. So the SEC will get a later start to the season. So that's kind of a disadvantage for them, but it is what it is. So yeah. So the SEC will be starting a little later when it comes to women's volleyball. And here's the format. 6 weeks of competition. So it's not too far. And Davidson Crook says, I'm happy for those kids to play. I am too. Like, there are a lot of talented teams in the SEC when it comes to women's volleyball. There's Kentucky, then there's Florida, and then I think a few other teams are starting to get better as well, but we'll have to see. But back to the volleyball format. The season starts on October 27th. Okay, that's cool, I guess. So, or I'm sorry, not October 27th, October 16th. So they won't be starting for another month and a half. So it sucks if you're an SEC volleyball fan, but at least you're going to get some volleyball in the near future. And there will be 6 weeks of competition. Only 6. And like I said, competition ends, or the season ends on November 27th. And then, according to this, it says they'll compete against 4 opponents, which is the same opponent twice in the same weekend. And then it'll only be 8 matches. So that's kind of weird. That means they'll only be facing 4 opponents altogether. Like, let's say Alabama will be facing Auburn, Florida, LSU, Kentucky, and that's only that's only 4 opponents, and that only totals up to 8 matches. And I think it'll be remote areas. I think if let's say Alabama plays Auburn, and then it's going to be at Auburn, I think it's going to be at back-to-back days. So if Alabama will play at Auburn on, let's say, Friday, and then they'll play on Saturday. So I guess that's a pretty good format, but that just seems a little small, and it just means that margin for error is not nowhere near big. And I guess it's kind of good when it comes to being spaced out, but again, margin of error is now crucial for every team, and there will be no non-conference matchups considering because of COVID and all that. So there's that. Last year, if you all remember, the SEC was kind of a tight race. So believe it or not, in conference last year, Florida and Kentucky tied for the top spot and tied for the conference championship last year, but I guess they gave the tiebreaker to Florida, even though Kentucky beat them twice last year, which is kind of strange. Florida does return quite a bit of firepower this upcoming year with certain players like Thayer Hall, just to name a few. And Florida is always good in the swamp. Like, not a whole lot of teams can beat Florida at Florida and live to tell the tale. So I definitely can see Kentucky and Florida leading the SEC again. Texas A&M is also up there. They had a pretty good year as well. And also Missouri and Georgia were good as well. I think A&M is just as good, but I think A&M is probably just as good. And A&M had a pretty deep run themselves last year before losing in the Sweet 16. So I'm excited for what's to come, honestly. And I think that this team the SEC is going to bring forth a lot of interesting surprises because, like I said, it's only 8 matches in the span of 6 weeks. And then you're facing the opponents back-to-back, so on back-to-back days. So that's kind of a cool thing. I mean, I like it. I just think it's just a little too short. I mean, for 8 matches. I mean, that's quite the fascinating aspect. But it's good to see the SEC stepping up because the SEC is a Power 5 conference, and unlike certain other 2 Power 5 conferences, Pac-12, Big Ten, the SEC actually has a plan. So I give the SEC a little bit of a round of applause for thinking outside the box and keeping their season going and not jumping the gun on canceling / postponing the fall season. So that's good stuff by the SEC. I really hope we do get to see Florida and Kentucky. I really don't want to see like Florida versus Auburn, Mississippi State, Alabama, and Arkansas, or Kentucky versus Ole Miss, Tennessee, LSU, and South Carolina. Like, the problem with that is if that actually happens, what's going to be the criteria of a tiebreaker? I mean, maybe that's what the extra week might be for, because looking on Mr. Calendar right here, October 16th and 17th will be the start of the SEC conference play and the start of all SEC conference play teams going on. So if 2 teams, that's first 2 games are on the 16th and the 17th. Games 3 and 4 are on the 23rd and 24th. Third games are on the 30th and 31st, and then the 5th and the 7th and the 8th games are on the 6th and the 7th. That doesn't make sense. Like, I kind of think they're going to be panning it out. The thing about the SEC is that there is no conference championship game. It's not like other conferences, like the Ivy League or whatnot. So there is no conference championship or whatnot. So I don't know. I don't know how they're going to be formatting this. If they're going to have 2 matches every weekend, then I don't know how they're going to make that work, because I would think they'd be spreading it out a little bit more, but either way, I think the SEC knows what it's doing. So, I mean, from what I'm seeing on this website, I mean, so we'll see. We'll see how it goes for the SEC. It says 6 weeks of competition and then 8 total matches, but they'll say, it says, once again, the SEC says teams will compete against 4 opponents, and then they'll face the same opponent twice in the same weekend. If that's the case, and they're only playing an 8 grand total of 8 total matches, they're only playing for 4 weeks. I mean, I'm no SEC expert, but that if you're playing that means you're leaving out 2 weeks. You're leaving a grand total of 2 weeks playing. Unless the SEC plans to have their teams play non-conference games, which, if that's the case, that's pretty cool. And then maybe they push the SEC to the 30th, SEC play to the 30th and the 31st, and then have conference games go on until the 27th and the 28th. And maybe the 27th is for like tiebreakers and whatnot, just in case they do have a scenario where 2 teams like Florida and Kentucky tie with one another and are the co-conference champions, and then they need one team to see who will get the automatic berth. But honestly, I could see a lot of teams from the SEC going to the NCAA tournament. I mean, it's crawling. The conference is crawling with a lot of talented teams. It's not just Florida and Kentucky. It's Texas A&M. It's Missouri. Georgia's kind of pretty good as well. Last year they went 20-10, and they went 12-6 in conference play. South Carolina is pretty solid. LSU, I don't think they made the tournament because they went 9-9 in conference play and 15-13 overall. I also don't think Tennessee made it as well. So that's a thing right there. Either way, I with a lot, and you also kind of have to factor in that a lot of these conference teams, such as like the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, have cut their women's volleyball seasons, or postponed it, or canceled it. Either way, it opens the door for other teams, but you also could factor in like other teams from like smaller conferences getting in. So, or the NCAA could have a smaller championship, but then again, they've postponed all fall championships for women's volleyball, which really sucks, but what can we do? I mean, that leads me to another question. If they're postponing the fall championships, what will they be doing regarding that? Like, are they going to just postpone the season until like spring and then just play the NCAA Women's Volleyball Championships then? I don't know. It just seems like a weird and interesting format, and you also got to factor in that if they're really not going to cancel the Pac-12 women's volleyball play, like, you also have to wonder, like, could they be giving the Pac-12 or the Big Ten a chance to catch up with the rest of the pack, with the rest of the teams that have already played in the fall? But another problem with that is, if some of these women's volleyball conferences like the Pac-12 and the Big Ten do get to play their games in the winter or the spring, they also have to compete with the men's and women's basketball teams, and they also have to compete with the men's volleyball team as well. So that's a very, very tough situation for the Big 12. I really think the Pac-12 jumped the gun and canceled all their sporting events till the end of the calendar year. I think that was just a very terrible decision on the Pac-12's part. And same goes for the Big Ten. Like, they've kind of made their bed, so now they're kind of stuck in it. So it really is tough. Like, it's not going to be a full, complete season, and I hope most people don't, like, put an asterisk over it, considering that I just think it'll be a pure championship. Like, obviously it won't have the same feel to it like the Stanfords and the Wisconsins, because let's be honest, not having Stanford in the NCAA championship isn't going to be the same. And Wisconsin was also supposed to be a heavy favorite this year, and then with the Big Ten and Pac-12 opting out, we won't be seeing those teams, which kind of sucks. But again, if they are postponing the fall championships to maybe spring or late winter or something like that, could they be giving the Pac-12 and the Big Ten a chance to catch up? Again, this is just some food for thought on my part. I mean, I kind of like having the segment of Teran's food for thought, and I think that'd be a pretty good idea. It would be fair, but you also have to factor in some of the other teams that will be stuck in not playing other teams until like the spring or late winter. So it is tough. It's like they're really not making this easy with canceling all fall championships, and with the Pac-12 canceling their season until the end of not the Pac-12 canceling their season, the Pac-12 canceling all their sporting events, and then the Big Ten canceling all their sporting events for the most part, and it really sucks. And then this talking about the Power 5 leads me to another topic of the Big 12. The Big 12 has decided they will be having women's volleyball and most fall sports. The problem is, however, they will be having an all-conference format. And two women's volleyball teams that have released their schedule, or that deserve noting of their schedule release, is Texas and Baylor. And I'm pretty much going to skim through this schedule. I don't think I'm going to be taking a commercial break unless I really need to, but let's do this. So first off is Texas. Texas being one of the more talented and potent teams this year, a team that had a lot of poise and high expectations in the NCAA tournament. So yeah, let's go over the Texas Longhorns and recap their season. So Texas was one of few teams that pushed Stanford to 5 sets, which was in the regular season. Unfortunately, Stanford wound up winning that game, which was quite the bummer, but it is what it is. So whatever. So Texas tied for the Big Ten Conference Championship, and they were one of two teams. They were the only team to hand Baylor its only regular season loss. So that was kind of a unfortunate event for Baylor right there. Texas and Baylor did tie for the conference championship in the Big 12. So, however, Baylor did get the number 1 seed because their strength of schedule was better, or their body of work. Like in a fair format, in a fair tiebreaker format, Texas would hold the tiebreaker since they've won more sets than Baylor. However, Baylor only lost 1 game that year in the regular season. That was to Texas. So they were rewarded the number 1 seed of the NCAA tournament, and then Texas kind of got the short end of the stick being the number 2 seed. Notice the word got the short end of the stick being the number 2 seed, as I will be explaining that right now. Texas did not have the run that most people thought they were going to have. Obviously, they breezed through their first round matchup, beating the heck out of University of Albany, which, well, that wasn't surprising. What was surprising, however, was their second round matchup against UC Santa Barbara, where they had to grind that one out in 5 sets. Now, I give a little credit to Santa Barbara. The Gauchos were really good. I think them finishing in 3rd place in the Big West Conference does not reflect the body of work that the Gauchos had, and I think Santa Barbara, to me, was one of the more underrated teams, and I think their RPI was pretty high as well. It's just that when it came to conference, Santa Barbara just had too many conference blemishes. Like, they had 4 conference losses, which 2 of which were to Hawaii, which was kind of expected. 1 of which was to Cal Poly, which also was expected. I think, or was it 2? I think it was 2 losses were to Cal Poly, and then 1 loss was to Long Beach State. Go Beach! I'm just kidding. But yeah, I think Santa Barbara, those losses to Santa Barbara kind of threw everyone off for a loop. But I knew the Gauchos were pretty good, especially since they had the Rudden sisters, Lindsay and Gigi. And Santa Barbara was very close to pulling off the upset against the number 2 Longhorns. And keep in mind, this round 2 matchup was played at the University of Texas. Texas was hosting the entire regionals until the Elite 8, which is definitely a huge benefit for Texas for how amazing of a season they had. Unfortunately, they barely squeaked out a win over Santa Barbara. I kind of knew they were going to squeak out the win. I knew it was going to be tough, but I didn't think the Gauchos would push them to 5. Yeesh. But unfortunately, Santa Barbara couldn't pull the upset. Texas turned on the plot armor button and said, hey, we're not losing at our home floor, so bye, Gauchos. But the underwhelming thing was that Texas lost in the Sweet 16 to Louisville. They lost to Louisville. Now I believe Louisville was the 2nd or 3rd place team from the ACC, which that's a little disappointing if you ask me. I mean, I know Louisville has some talented players, but to beat Texas, that's impressive. I think last year, of all the teams in the NCAA tournament, I think Texas was the most disappointing. And that's kind of what's going to be the fuel for their fire. They know they can make a deep NCAA tournament run. And without the Pac-12 being in, and without the Big Ten, which is home to Stanford in the Pac-12, which is the reigning champion, and then Wisconsin in the Big 12 in the Big Ten, Texas could have the SEC could be easy pickings for Texas this year. So it's kind of cool. I mean, that's kind of a thing right there. I think Texas definitely has a good shot at it. They definitely returned some talented players, such as like Riley Eggman, and they also returned Jenna Gabriel, who is their setter, and she's a pretty darn good setter. She even has this viral video of her. I believe she's 5'8", and then she won a joust at the net against I think a girl that was 6'2", 6'4". She was. Bottom line is that Jenna Gabriel won a joust at the net. And for those of you that don't know what a joust is, think of it as two lances pushing off with one another in medieval times. Her hand and the opposing girl's hand basically pushed against the ball, and then she won. Her hand basically beat the other girl's hand. And this was against BYU, and BYU has some pretty darn good players. So, anyway, back to University of Texas's squad. Jenna Gabriel is a player that returns. I'm sorry, did I say Riley Eggman? I mean Logan Exelton. I'm thinking of someone else, but Logan Exelton returns for the University of Texas, and Texas is also getting a talented freshman by the name of Nalani Iosia. Now, if you were wondering if that name rings a bell, she was on the Redondo Union girls volleyball team that won the CIF Southern Section Championship last year. So I expect Iosia to battle it out for some playing time. And for those of you that are wondering, Nalani is the younger sister of Noreen Iosia, who played at the University of Hawaii, which is cool. So I really expect Nalani to get some playing time or battle it out for the libero position, because the libero position is one of the more challenging positions, especially for a freshman. But I've seen freshmen master that position and make some amazing plays. Hence, Mason Briggs of Long Beach State. And yes, I mentioned Mason Briggs because I did a feature on him, but I digress. So, either way, I can see Texas having a deep run this year. You also have to make note that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are not playing this year. No Stanford to possibly repeat as champions. No Wisconsin to possibly challenge anyone. No other teams such as Penn State, no Minnesota, no Nebraska, no USC, no UCLA, no Washington State. None of those teams from the Big Ten and the Pac-12. They are off the board. You cannot consider them. They're not going to be in consideration of champion unless, of course, they play in the winter or they play late winter, and then they have the fall championships sometime in the spring. But then you also have to wonder, will the women's volleyball teams have to battle it out for who uses the court with some of these other teams that are using the court, whether it's men's or women's basketball, or when it comes to men's volleyball. So that's another food for thought right there. So as for Texas, I really am excited to see this Texas team. I think this Texas team can do some damage this year. The first opponent for Texas is on September 24th. They play on a Thursday, which is pretty cool. They play Oklahoma. They are at Oklahoma. Now, I think Oklahoma is the best third-place team in the conference, as according to the Big 12 volleyball standings. Like I said, Baylor and Texas tied for first place. Oklahoma was a distant third place, finishing 11-5. 11-5, while Baylor and Texas each finished 15-1. Basically, Oklahoma was, I think they were 4 games back of Texas and Baylor, which is kind of overwhelming if you ask me. It's basically a 2-horse race in the Big 12. Oklahoma is a good third-place team, though, but they're kind of the best team that I'd pick to take third place in, but they're not on the level of Baylor and Texas. Like, Baylor and Texas are way up there. Oklahoma is just not on their level. And then the rest of the Big 12 is kind of underwhelming as well. Like, after Oklahoma, it's a far drop down. Like, there's Iowa State, which finished 4th last year at 8-8 and 7-12 overall. There's Texas Tech, which finished 7-9 and 17-13. Then the list goes down to Kansas, TCU, Kansas State, and West Virginia. So I definitely think the Big 12 will be decided by Texas and Baylor. But I definitely do expect Oklahoma to at least give Texas somewhat of a challenge, especially since the Texas gym is probably not going to have any fans. I definitely do not see any fans going to be had. But then again, I totally forgot. Texas is playing at Oklahoma, so if anything, that'll benefit Oklahoma having more so than not. But then again, Texas is probably used to not playing in opposing fans' gym, and also, they're just flying over. Like, with no fans in the gym, like, the only not so beneficial thing for Texas is that Texas has to travel to Oklahoma. And I guess that could be a little taxing going from Texas all the way to the Panhandle State. So, it'll do. But honestly, I definitely think Texas can win that. It's kind of a good challenge for Texas opening up its season, especially if they're gonna want to knock off Baylor. After Texas plays Oklahoma, they play Kansas the week after. They play Kansas on October 1st and October 2nd, which is the Thursday and the Friday. Looks like majority of Texas's games will be on Thursday and Friday, with a few exceptions of playing on Saturday, and the one lone exception being playing on Sunday, which I'll be getting to that shortly. Then after Kansas State, Texas... Oh, and by the way, Texas's matchups against Kansas, they are going to be at home in the Frank C. Irwin Jr. Special Events Center, so that's basically University of Texas. And then after Kansas, Texas is home again against Iowa State on the October 8th and October 9th. And then after Iowa State, Texas travels to Kansas State to play on October 16th and October 17th, which is a Friday and a Saturday. And then after that, which, oh, by the way, that is when the SEC starts its play. So I expect Texas to actually keep an eye on the SEC as well, since the SEC, like I said, they have some talented teams such as Florida and Kentucky. So anyway, back to University of Texas's schedule. After their matchups against Kansas State, Texas returns to its University of Texas to play Texas Tech on October 22nd and October 23rd, which is a Thursday and a Friday. And then on October 30th, which is a Friday and a Saturday, Texas still remains at home to play TCU, which I could see them winning that. Now, the big matchup, the big matchup right here. This is a very interesting format. Now, this is a very interesting situation here. Now, here's the deal. Texas plays Baylor after their 2-game set against TCU. So, they play Baylor on a Friday, November 6th. But that's not the interesting part. The true interesting part is that Texas plays Baylor again, but instead of playing on Saturday in the first of a back-to-back, or in the second of a back-to-back, they play Baylor on a Sunday. Texas plays Baylor on a Sunday, which is very, very, very strange. I mean, I guess that's a good idea since those are two talented teams and they deserve their rest. And Baylor isn't going that far. Like, maybe they'll probably be flying to the next city or busing it to the next city. Probably busing it would be better considering they don't want to fly and risk spreading germs around. Either way, it is going to be the Battle of Texas, and it will be at Texas's home gymnasium. Now, once again, I highly doubt the Big 12 will be having fans at these games. So it'll be kind of an awkward gymnasium with Baylor and Texas when Baylor and Texas face one another, because Baylor and Texas's fans, when it comes to volleyball, are super duper passionate. So without a full gymnasium, it's going to be quite the awkward scene. So anyway, back to Texas' schedule. After the matchup against Baylor, Texas closes off the season again at Western Virginia. The thing about Texas' matchup against Baylor is that it's going to be their senior night. I'm pretty sure they're going to have their senior night against Baylor. If not, they're going to have it against Texas Tech. If they have their senior night against Baylor, then I expect Texas to come out guns a-blazing, because honestly, that Texas team is hungry, and they have a lot of redemption to do. They have a lot of redemption on their plate, considering last year was quite the disappointing season, considering they lost in the Sweet 16, and they lost to an unseeded team, which is quite the sad scene. I think, Louisville, I believe, was unseeded. I could be wrong, but I highly doubt it, because Louisville, to me, was not good. Like, Louisville is Louisville. Like, nothing against them, but I just don't think that Louisville was good enough to win. So, it's quite the shame, but it is what it is, and that's the past, though. So, that's kind of in the past, and Louisville was unranked, so that really is the bummer. That really is the pit. So overall, I think Texas can go 15-1 again, if not 16-0. Like, the big matchup is obviously going to be against Baylor. However, they also can't underestimate the potential trap games that Texas will be facing off against. Like, they can't take Oklahoma for granted, because Oklahoma is a pretty good team, regardless of them finishing in third place. So I don't know, man. Like, I definitely think Texas can vie for the championship. Like, there's no doubt about it. Like, 'cause like I said, it's going to be between them, and it's going to be between Baylor. So just looking at the schedule from Texas's schedule from last year, and if I can get to it, that is. So I don't think there were too many teams that challenged Texas last year, honestly. So yeah, it is quite disappointing. I mean, I'd like to see Texas get challenged. I mean, Iowa State took a set off them. Yeah, a lot of these games were sweeps. Oklahoma took a set off them last year, which is good. Baylor beat them. Kansas took a state off of Texas, and then Iowa State took a set off of Texas. However, I think the reason why Kansas and Iowa State took a set off of Texas was because Texas was coming off of an emotional loss at Baylor, which you can't blame those kids. So, yeah, I think Texas goes no less than 14-2. If they're going to go 14-2, their only two losses are going to be against Baylor. If Texas loses to any other team, then the underachieving is going to continue from last year, which is very concerning if you're a Texas fan. So that's just me. I definitely think Texas is a good team. And later on in this, and probably in a little bit, I'll be giving you all 5 reasons on why Baylor and Texas are the heavy favorites this year, and how they could meet up in the NCAA final. But enough on that. We're actually going to get to Baylor's schedule. Now, Baylor's schedule is quite different. Now, Baylor also opens up on the road, and they open up against Kansas, which is the Jayhawks Rock Chalk, which I expect, Baylor opens up their season on Friday and Saturday at Kansas, September 25th and September 26th. Yeah, I could see Baylor winning those matchups. I also can see Baylor beating TCU the week after. TCU has a good squad, and they made it all the way to the Final Four of the CIT, which is basically the NIT tournament, but not really. But that was about it. So yeah, I could see Baylor blowing by Kansas and TCU as long as they don't look far ahead. Now, those two matchups could be a potential trap game for when they play Oklahoma. Oklahoma, like I said, is the only other team that's better. That's the good team in their conference. Like, other than Baylor and Texas, Oklahoma's kind of the third horse out. So Baylor plays Oklahoma at Baylor on October 9th and October 10th. As long as they don't look too far ahead from their matchups against, as long as they don't look too far ahead, I definitely can see Baylor winning that. Because let's be honest with ourselves, Baylor is Baylor, and the fact that they return Yesenia Presley is very scary. So, yeah, and for those of you that are wondering, Yesenia Presley is the AVCA Volleyball Player of the Year, and she's going to be a senior this year, so that's going to be some really good. And Baylor, to me, is kind of like the Los Angeles Clippers of women's volleyball. They're talented, but they haven't won a championship, so Baylor is long yearning for that elusive championship, and last year they had the number 1 seed. So yeah, before I continue on with Baylor's schedule, let's recap Baylor from last year. Baylor was a really talented team. They only lost one time in the regular season. They shared the Big 12 championship with Texas, which was their only loss, and they didn't lose. They started the season off, I think, 10-0, and they didn't even drop a set. So yeah. And big shout out to Marcus Loscrate joining me in the chat room. How's it going, Marcus? In case you're wondering what's happened, Marcus, a player from Long Beach Poly has committed to USC. The SEC has announced a new schedule, and I'm talking about Baylor volleyball. So, and by the way, this USC prospect is the number 2 junior or is the top junior prospect. So USC is getting a good one. So fight on for USC. So anyway, back to Baylor. Baylor was the number 1 seed of the tournament. They weren't really challenged too much. They beat USC. I believe they beat. It was either Creighton or Kentucky. Yeah, it was. I think it was Kentucky in the Sweet 16. Then they beat Washington in the Elite 8, and then they lost to Wisconsin in the Final Four, which is sad face, but it's whatever. Like, I don't think Baylor would have beaten Stanford, honestly. Like, I just think Stanford had too much firepower with Jenna Gray, Catherine Plummer, Audrina Fitzmaurice, Morgan Hens. The list goes on and on. So, but with Baylor returning most of their players back, including Yesenia Presley, I think this Baylor team is primed for a deep run this year. And you also got to remember, no Pac-12, meaning no Stanford, no USC, no Washington, no UCLA, none of that. And no Big Ten, meaning no Nebraska, no Wisconsin, no Penn State, no Minnesota, no Purdue, none of that. No. So you have to wonder if Baylor is potentially the favorite to win it all, along with Texas. So, yeah, last year marked Baylor's first ever appearance in the. Oh no! Baylor beat Purdue, then they beat Washington. So I was way off. So my bad. Yeah. So yeah. I think. And once again, Baylor did not reach the. I think last year was their first ever appearance in the Final Four. So like I said, Baylor is kind of like the Los Angeles Clippers of NCAA volleyball. They are talented, but unfortunately, they just don't have that championship yet. And they haven't really made the final yet. I mean, the only difference between the Clippers and the Baylor women's volleyball team is that Baylor's actually made the semifinals. But that's for another day. We're talking volleyball here, not basketball. So I digress on that. Back to Baylor. like I said, Baylor returns the best player in the nation, being Yasonia Presley, who was the Big 12 Player of the Year, and she was the AVCA Player of the Year last year. So now we can get back to Baylor's schedule. So after Baylor's home matchup against Oklahoma on October 9th and 10th, which is a Friday and Saturday, Baylor goes down to Texas Tech to play Texas Tech, where they play on October 16th and 17th, which is a Friday and a Saturday. Then after the Texas Tech matchup, Baylor plays at Iowa State on October 23rd and October 24th, which is a Friday and a Saturday, and that's going to be an away game for Baylor. They're playing at Iowa State. And then the week after, Baylor has a quick turnaround as they return home to Baylor University, where they play West Virginia on October 29th and October 30th, which is a Thursday and a Friday. Now for their big-time matchup against Texas. They play at University of Texas on November 6th and November 8th. Once again, that is a Friday and a Sunday. Again, I still find that weird that we'll be seeing volleyball on Sunday. I mean, it isn't uncommon. I've seen women's volleyball matches being played on Sunday, hence the Pac-12 and some Big Ten matchups, but I just find it rather strange that the Big 12 would schedule a matchup on Sunday. But I guess that's to give Baylor and Texas one day of rest and one day more of preparation. So either way, I think that's good thinking on the Big 12's part, because Baylor and Texas is a potential finals preview. Let's just leave it at that. And then after Baylor's matchup against Texas, Baylor returns to their humble abode, where they play Kansas State on November 20th and November 21st against Kansas State. And like I said for Texas, I think Baylor goes no less than 14-2, and the most I could see them going 16-0. If they're going to lose a couple games, it's going to be to Texas. I don't see Baylor losing to Oklahoma, to any other team that's not named Texas. Maybe Oklahoma if Baylor gets caught on a bad night. But honestly, I definitely can see Baylor possibly winning the conference championship, but honestly, it's tough to tell with Texas and Baylor, because both of those teams return most of their star players. So I digress on that. So now I said we were gonna take a commercial break, but why not? I think I'm gonna spend the last 12 minutes explaining why I think Baylor and Texas are the favorites to win it all this year. All right, so I'll try to think of 5 reasons why Baylor and Texas are the favorites to win this year. So first and foremost, the first reason is that those two teams return most of their talented players. Texas being Logan Exelton and Jenna Gabriel, while Baylor returns Yasonia Presley, who is the reigning AVCA Player of the Year, as well as the Big 12 Player of the Year. Now, obviously Texas got some new recruits that came in, as well as Baylor did, but to me, this one's 50-50. You can make the argument for both teams, and it sucks that one team has to lose, but both of these teams return quite a bit of firepower, and it's going to be between those two teams. The only negative between those two teams is that they play in a conference that's not as good, that they don't really get much of a challenge. And other than facing themselves, they don't get a challenge of facing that third best team. Oklahoma's a good team, don't get me wrong. But, like I said, Oklahoma is nowhere near on the level of Texas or Baylor, which is kind of sad, because I like seeing third place teams give the first place teams a fit or somewhat. Either way, I digress on that. So that's reason number 1. I think reason number 1 is Baylor and Texas return a majority of their talented players. Reason number 2, the Big 12 and the Pac-12 are off the table. Now, you have the other two powerhouse conferences, or the not powerhouse conferences, Power 5 conferences, being the ACC and the SEC. Don't get me wrong, Florida is a good team as well as Kentucky, but that's about it. They're good, though. I don't think they're well enough to have a deep playoff run, which is sad because I want to see the SEC actually be represented, but I just don't think they have it in them. So I just think Florida is just way too good. They're just too good, man. They're just too good. I just think that when it comes to like other powerhouse teams, I think those are the only two, and I don't think any team challenges those two. Like that's the reason number 2. No team really challenges Baylor and Texas other than themselves. And you gotta remember, there's no Stanford, no Wisconsin, no Penn State, no Nebraska, no Minnesota. None of those teams from the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. I'm gonna say that for probably the millionth time, but no. There is none of those teams from the Pac-12 and Big Ten can challenge Texas and Baylor, unless of course that they manage to play in the spring. But again, that's going to be too late in the season, and I think that'll be unfair. So I think that would be unfair if they gave an extended break to the teams that played in the fall and the teams that are playing in the winter who are playing one another, and then it comes NCAA tournament time in like February or March, and then all the teams that play in the fall will be super rusty, while some of these teams that played in the wintertime will be somewhat fresh. So, yeah, again, it's just one big situation that COVID has put all of the fall sports and conferences in. So, anyway, you look at Florida from last year. Florida. They lost in the Sweet 16 to Minnesota. Now, I think Florida was the number 10 seed. I'm almost certain that Florida was the number 10 seed. However, they lost at Minnesota in 5. Now, that matchup could have gone either way. 10 versus 7 is always the tricky matchup. But I just think Florida was better than Minnesota. I think Minnesota had some good seniors, but I think Florida had the firepower, in my opinion. So, but again, I digress on that. So, but to me, I don't think any team from the SEC challenges any team from the Big 12, and I don't think that any team from the SEC challenges Baylor or Texas. So, that's just my spiel right there. So that's the number 2 reason. No other team challenges Texas and Baylor. Number 3 reason is that there's going to only be 2 there's going to be 2 less power conference teams. Meaning, in other words, like I said, no Stanford and no Wisconsin. Because you look at the Final Four from last year. The Final Four consisted of Baylor, Stanford, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. 3 of those 4 teams will not be playing in the fall. Unless, of course, they plan to play in the winter, and then we get to see everyone playing in the spring. I just don't see that the NCAA women's volleyball tournament including them this year. So Baylor is the only team that's going to be playing in the fall. Texas, however, Texas lost in the Sweet 16 for those that don't know, or for those that are tuning in late. So that's another thing right there. And I just don't, and that kind of goes with number 2, but I just don't think that number 3 is basically no Stanford and no Wisconsin. Stanford was probably one of the favorites to repeat, and Wisconsin was the favorite to win it all this year with players such as Danielle Hilley and Dana Redke and whatnot. So honestly, without Wisconsin and Stanford, I think this is Baylor and Texas's championship. So we'll see. So the number 3 reason is no Stanford and no Wisconsin. It kind of vies into number 2, but I just think that those 2 were the front runners to win it all this year. And then COVID happened, and then the directors of the Pac-12 and the Big Ten said, "No season for you. Sorry." So the number 4 reason is that Baylor and Texas have high expectations this year, and they had high expectations last year but didn't live up to them. Baylor, being the number one team in the nation for a majority of the season last year, was huge. Like, I think for the majority of the year, Baylor was number one until Texas knocked them off. And then once they beat Texas, Baylor got to being the number one seed, or the number one team in the nation. And they were the number one team until the Final Four, where they lost to Wisconsin. Oh no, they lost to Wisconsin. Oh no! So, yeah. I just think that Baylor... And this year, Baylor and Texas have high expectations, and I expect them to meet those expectations and go above and beyond. Because, like I said, Baylor is long yearning for a championship, while Texas is looking to win their first championship since 2012, I want to say? I think it was 2012. Yeah, 2012 was when they last won the NCAA championship. Which is cool. But, yeah. Other than that, Texas has kind of been in a drought, which you kind of have to feel bad for Texas, but I don't. I don't, because I'm a Pac-12 guy. I'm just kidding. I like Texas. Texas is pretty good. So, number 4 reason is that Texas and Baylor have high expectations. The number 5 reason is that I just think those two are destined to meet each other. I know it sounds cliche, but they were the number 1 and number 2 seeded teams. You take Stanford and you take all these other teams out of the equation, those two are probably meeting in the NCAA final. Like, if Texas didn't lose in the Sweet 16, I see them taking on Stanford, and I see Texas giving Stanford a tough matchup. However, that wasn't the case, as Texas lost in the Sweet 16, and then to Louisville, and then Louisville lost in the Elite 8 to Minnesota, and then Minnesota lost in the Final Four to Stanford, and then Stanford won it all. Yay. But if Texas does get out of the round of 16, I see them spanking Minnesota. And then I see Texas giving a much bigger battle to Stanford. Considering Texas lost to Stanford early in the season last year, and then they came very close to beating them, honestly. And then what happened is that I think that Texas probably could have given. Like I said, definitely could have given a better matchup against Minnesota. However, I think Texas could have beaten them, because Texas would have had a lot of momentum going forward, and I think they would have been over the Baylor loss. And also, I think they would have been scratching their chins and being like, we're one win away from a possible date with Baylor. Hoo-hoo-hoo. And unfortunately, we're never going to get that aspect, so I think when it comes to reason number 5 is that Baylor and Texas are a match made in heaven. Like, it's a rivalry made in heaven. And although we're not going to see if they are going to have the fall championship in like the spring or in the winter or whatnot, we probably won't see fans, but we probably see a lot of Texas and Baylor fans glued to their TVs if Texas and Baylor aren't playing in the national championship in football. So there's that. So, recapping the top 5 reasons, the reason number 1 that I think Baylor and Texas are the possible favorites to win it all is that they return a lot of players and they're bringing in a lot of talented players. The second reason is that no team can really challenge them that's playing this year. No team that's playing this year, or no team that is playing this year, can touch them. The third reason is that there's no Stanford and Wisconsin, which were the 2 heavy favorites going into this season, but Big 12 and Pac-12, or the Big 10 and the Pac-12 pulled the plug on them, on their season. So it's pretty much all Big 12 and everyone else's party to play in. The number 4 reason is that both teams have high expectations, and that they had high expectations last year. Texas didn't really meet the high expectations, and Baylor kind of ran into a hot Wisconsin team that had determination of steel. But I think this year is a much different story. And then the last reason is because the two are a match made in heaven, and in a perfect world, Baylor would play Texas if it weren't for Stanford having such really good firepower and Baylor running into a hot Wisconsin team. And then you also have to factor in Texas's bad luck in the Sweet 16. Like, they went down 2-0 to Louisville. Texas finally got together and forced a fifth set. And then Louisville pulled the plug and said, "Not today, Texas. Have a good flight home." So, I just think... So those are my top 5 reasons. They sound cliche, obviously, but that's what I think. That's my personal opinion. And to me, I think that without that powerhouse team that possibly stands above Baylor and Texas, this is definitely Baylor and Texas's year. Again, we could be seeing... You never know what the NCAA is going to throw at us. Like, they could throw a curveball for all I know, considering they could have the NCAA Women's Volleyball Championships in the winter or in the spring or whatnot. And then maybe they can give the Pac-12 and the Big Ten a chance to catch up with everyone who's played in the fall. So... Again, that's just food for thought on my part, but to me, I just don't think... But once again, to me, women's volleyball shouldn't have gotten canceled because it is social distancing for the most part. Like, the only issue would probably be to wipe up the floor with like one of those big floor cleaners or like those big squeegees, and then cleaning the ball after a kill and pretty much cleaning the floor after a kill, considering the ball probably had sweat on it and whatnot. So it's one of those small detailing factors that play the big role. But again, I think or you also might have to wonder maybe the Big 12 should adopt the bubble policy, and just play in like a remote area where there's no home court advantage, no fans, no nothing. So again, it's just me, and maybe I'm just convoluted, or maybe I'm just over the top, but I'm just trying to find solutions to this thing, because I do want my volleyball, but I'm glad we're getting the season, and I'm glad we're making do what it do. And to me, I think this is... I'll definitely get more in depth into the Big 12 and more of these volleyball teams, as most of these teams will be releasing their schedule. The Sun Belt Conference also had their teams release their schedules, and I think they're playing like an 8-game conference format as well. It's just going to be conference only, though, but I won't be diving into the big... I won't be diving into that conference until like maybe next week. Once I get a full feel for all the conferences, like I saw the Texas schedule and the Baylor schedule, and it's like, oh goody, because again, those two teams are the favorites, and I think those two teams can and will most likely be meeting up. If the season started now, and all the teams that have opted out said, "Oh, we're not playing this year," well, have a good fall. We won't be seeing you in the championship in the near future. So, if we had the season go on live, I think, and we had the power rankings or the preseason rankings, I definitely put Baylor and Texas at number 1 and number 2. And it's tough to decide, and you can make the argument for either one of those teams being 1 or 2. So, again, it's just food for thought on my part. Like, you never know. Again, once we get more NCAA news, I'll be able to talk about it, and once the season gets closer and closer, I'll be going more in depth when it comes to these matchups, when it comes to not just the star players like Yasonia Presley or Jenna Gabriel or Logan Exelton. It'll be the reserves, the setters, the liberos, the key matchups, the team that has a lot of confidence going into said game and whatnot. And this will be for all conferences. The ACC has pushed back its start date but at the very least, we're like 22 days away, pretty much 22 days away from the first volleyball game. No, 23 days. I mean, the Texas website says 22, but they're factoring time and all that, so I digress. So we are 23 days away from seeing some actual volleyball played. I can't believe it's almost here. All this time of COVID and pretty much making do with what I've got, with bringing on guests and whatnot, will all be worth it for the Season 2 premiere of Set Point. But for now, we're in the off-season. I think the actual Season 2 premiere of Set Point will probably be on September 22nd. So 3 weeks from today will be the official Season 2 premiere of Set Point. And then the 1-year anniversary of Set Point will be on September 30th, which is a Wednesday. And I may have to shuffle SoCal Supreme Sports Show along with Set Point, because I definitely want to do a 1-year special, because I didn't think Set Point would be getting to 1 year, and it's already been 11 months since Set Point first started. So, and you know the story about how Set Point came to be. So I think that's going to be enough rambling for today, and we're going to wrap it up. If I see any more volleyball teams release their schedules, I will definitely post about it. I'm glad that volleyball season is so close. Like, it feels like forever. Like, it feels like it's been like almost a month since we last got a live volleyball event. Like, obviously we had the AVP events, but it was only those 3 events, and it was just beach volleyball. Like, if you're just a full indoor volleyball fan and you don't follow beach, it's kind of tough for you. But if you follow volleyball like I do, then I count the AVP events as live volleyball events, and the fact that we got some events in the summer definitely helped keep Set Point going. And once again, I definitely want to keep Set Point going for as long as I can, even though I'll more than likely be getting busy with school and whatnot, but we're going to keep chugging along, because once this train gets going, it's tough to stop it. So episode 55 will be the Season 2 premiere of Set Point. So mark your calendars, because the Season 2 premiere of Set Point will be on September 22nd, 3 weeks from today. But right now, it is time to get on going, time to get on out of here. Thank you all for tuning in to Set Point. I definitely appreciate you all. Big shout out to the chat room, to Larry B, to Davidson Crooks, and for Marcus Los Great for stopping by and saying hello. Wish you all could have engaged with me in this conversation, or if you had volleyball questions, that would have been great. I would have loved that, but it is what it is. Next week, we don't know. I don't know what's going to be going on next week. I'm going to keep you all in the dark. So we could have a guest. I'm trying to get a guest, but you'll have to wait and see. So without any further delay, it is time to drop the beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you all for tuning in to Set Point. Thank you if you tuned in live to Set Point. I definitely appreciate you tuning in live. If you're tuning in on the replay, I also thank you. Thank you to all those that have supported me, and to all those that continue to support IE Sports Radio. In less than 20 minutes, we will have Mr. Marcus Los Great go live with Gloves Off, a show dedicated to boxing. Everyone, have a great rest of the night, and I will see you all tomorrow. And for Set Point, I will see you all next week. Good night, everybody. Peace and blessings.